My cousin lived at my house for 12 years, entirely depending on my parents for food, clothes, and tuition. Yet at the end of the year, when discussing marriage plans, she opened her mouth and said to my parents, "Auntie, the groom's family requires the bride's family to prepare $60,000, and 3 pieces of precious jewelry are calculated separately. You raised me for so many years. I also consider myself like a daughter in this house, so you must prepare this amount to help me, okay?" My parents glanced at each other, not saying a word. My cousin thought they had agreed, happily calling her boyfriend. "See, I told you so. Auntie and uncle love me the most. Once we have the money in hand, let's go get a BMW 3 Series right away." A few days later, my parents placed a brand new property deed in front of me. A spacious apartment in the city center, fully paid off, as a wedding gift for you. My cousin's face turned pale. "Auntie, then what about my money and jewelry?" My mother slowly took a sip of water, smiling as she looked at her. "Your money and jewelry, go ask your biological mother. As for our family, raising you for 12 years cost over $165,000. This amount, shouldn't we calculate it clearly today?" Before we begin today's story, take a few seconds to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you live. I always enjoy reading comments from people all around the world and knowing that, even though we're thousands of miles apart, we're sharing this story together. Now, let's begin the story. The ambient warmth of our family dining room felt thick and suffocating. I sat entirely still at the edge of the mahogany table, my eyes anchored to the sheer audacity of my cousin, Vanessa. To any ordinary guest, the scene would look like a joyous family milestone. My 23-year-old cousin preparing to marry into a wealthy family, surrounded by a doting aunt and uncle who had given her everything. But to me, Chloe Miller, this moment was a declaration of absolute war. A calculated and mocking insult designed to bleed my parents dry for a wedding they had no business funding. Vanessa sat across from me, her manicured fingers resting casually against her glass as she looked at my mother with an air of absolute certainty. She genuinely believed that her sweet, manipulative words could force my parents to bow their heads, open their wallets, and fund her social climbing fantasies. She thought their silence meant compliance. She had no idea that in less than a week, my parents would present a brand new, ironclad real estate deed, but it wouldn't have her name on it. Vanessa thought she was walking away with a fortune, but her terrifying greed was about to trigger an unexpected financial autopsy that would leave her completely exposed and destitute. Aunt Susan, the custom in Zachary's family circle dictates that the bride's family provides a standard $60,000 wedding fund, and that doesn't even include the designer bridal jewelry. Vanessa began, her voice carrying a sweet that made my stomach churn. She leaned forward, looking closely at my mother with a smile plastered across her face. "You've raised me for so many years, and I've always considered myself like a daughter in this house, so you must prepare this amount to help me, okay?" Beside her sat my Aunt Brenda, her face lined with permanent satisfaction as she watched her daughter work the room. She didn't offer a single dollar of her own money to help her child. Instead, she just adjusted her posture and looked at my parents as if they were a lucky lottery ticket she was finally ready to cash in. "Right on." Aunt Brenda chimed in, a smug grin stretching across her face as she looked around our dining room. "If Vanessa marries into a good family, it brings so much status to all of us. Think of how proud and comfortable we will all be in the future." I quietly finished the last few bites of food in my bowl, a profound tightness choking my throat until I could barely swallow. My parents exchanged a long, heavy look across the table. Neither of them spoke a word. The quiet in the room was deafening, but Vanessa completely misread the room. Mistaking their stunned exhaustion for silent agreement, her eyes sparked with an ugly, triumphant energy as she immediately pulled out her phone and dialed her fiancé. "See, babe. I told you so. Auntie and uncle love me the most." Vanessa squealed into the receiver, her voice dripping with an unearned arrogance that bounced off the walls. "Once we have the money in hand, Let's go get a white BMW 3 Series right away. I watched her laugh and ramble on about leather seats, custom renovations, and luxury honeymoon destinations, using my parents' hard-earned savings to buy herself social status. To the outside world, our family was a picture of perfect, charitable harmony. For 12 long years, my parents had provided Vanessa with a roof over her head, paid for her tuition, bought her clothes, and ensured she never wanted for a single thing, entirely out of the goodness of their hearts. But the relatives who constantly praised my mother for her soft heart had absolutely no idea about the toxic parasite growing under our roof. Vanessa thought she had successfully manipulated her way into a luxury lifestyle, secure in the belief that my parents would always give in to her sweet talking. She believed that because she had occupied a bedroom in our house for a decade, she was entitled to our family's future. But as she finally hung up the phone and looked at me with a condescending smirk, a cold, quiet realization washed over me. My parents weren't weak, they were just meticulous. The clock was ticking, the trap was set, and Vanessa was about to learn that when you try to bleed an accountant's family dry, you end up paying back every single cent with interest. The sweet, triumphant grin on Vanessa's face lingered long after she hung up the phone. She leaned in close to my mother, her voice dripping with an artificial fondness that made my skin crawl. "Aunt Susan, Uncle Mark, please don't worry about that money," she murmured smoothly, offering a soft, placating squeeze to my mother's arm. "Just think of it as a temporary loan. Once Zachary and I get our careers fully established and start making real money, we are going to pamper you both and show you true gratitude." Aunt Brenda let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, the heavy wrinkles on her forehead shifting as she flashed a tight, satisfied smile. "Exactly. Look at how wonderful this is." She chimed in, crossing her legs and settling back into our plush sofa with an air of unearned victory. "If Vanessa secures a high-status marriage with a great guy, it makes this entire family look magnificent. Think of the comfortable, luxury lifestyle we'll all be enjoying together down the road." I quietly looked down at my plate, picking at the final few grains of rice left in my bowl. My throat felt incredibly tight, a bitter, suffocating knot forming deep in my chest that made it entirely impossible to swallow another bite. My mother didn't voice her thoughts. She simply stood up in silence and began stacking the empty dinner dishes. "Oh, let me do that, Aunt Susan. You go sit down and relax." Vanessa chimed in, displaying a rare, frantic burst of helpfulness. She eagerly snatched the plates from my mother's hands, her movements swift and practiced, as she began clearing the dining table while quietly humming a cheerful tune to herself. Over by the coffee table, Aunt Brenda picked up a toothpick, completely relaxed as she began mapping out her daughter's luxurious future aloud. "You know, a proper wedding fund absolutely must include a luxury vehicle," she mused, gesturing grandly into the air. "It gives the family immense face when you arrive at venues. Vanessa, make sure you tell Zachary to choose the white model. It looks incredibly high-end and elegant." "You're completely right, Mom," Vanessa called out from the kitchen counter, wiping her hands on a towel before stepping back into the dining room with a radiant, eager smile. "The designer jewelry can't be cheap either. It needs to be heavy, high-carat gold with custom settings. Otherwise, Zachary's extended family will completely look down on us. Luckily, you know a manager at that upscale boutique downtown who can get us an exclusive rate." She adjusted the collar of her shirt, her eyes sparkling with absolute greed. "And as for the bridal portraits, I've already decided we're flying out to Miami for a destination shoot. Everyone who is anyone does luxury travel photography for their wedding album these days." The two of them backhand forth went, trading lavish demands as if the entire arrangement was already a legally binding certainty. After finishing her display of cleaning, Vanessa glided over to my side of the table, a bright, unbothered smile plastered across her face. "Chloe, look, I know I got a little overly excited earlier during dinner," she whispered, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial tone as she leaned down over my shoulder. "Please don't take it the wrong way or hold it against me." She gave a small, condescending shrug of her shoulders. "You know how it is. planning a high society wedding requires an astronomical amount of cash. Aunt Susan has fully funded my lifestyle for 12 years, so it wouldn't make any logical sense for her to stop contributing now right when it matters most, don't you think? She leaned in closer, a smug, superior glint in her eyes. I've occupied a space in this house for over a decade, so I've easily earned my share of the family assets. Just stay relaxed. Once I'm married into high society and living comfortably, I'll make sure to remember your little family and throw some favors your way. I offered her a flat, ice-cold, yeah, refusing to grant her another syllable of my energy. Seeing my completely unbothered, neutral reaction, Vanessa's smile grew even more relaxed and self-satisfied, convinced that she had successfully managed to put me in my place. That night, I lay awake in bed, tossing and turning as the sheer arrogance of their entitlement replayed behind my eyelids. Around 2:00 a.m., driven by a deep restlessness, I quietly stepped out of my room to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. But as I crept down the darkened hallway, a muffled, malicious burst of giggling echoed from the cracked door of the guest lounge. I stopped dead in my tracks, freezing in the shadows as I realized Vanessa and Aunt Brenda were inside, whispering in the dark. "Mom, did you see Chloe's pathetic face at the table tonight?" Vanessa rucked, her voice dripping with absolute venom and mockery. She looked like she had literally swallowed a fly. She thinks she's so brilliant and intimidating, but all it took was a few soft, submissive words from me, and she was completely silenced. Why do you even waste your breath worrying about a girl like her? Aunt Brenda sneered back, letting out a low, cynical chuckle. She can't do a damn thing to stop us. The only thing that matters is getting that $60,000 corporate funding into our hands. Once that cash transfers, who cares what kind of miserable faces they make? Vanessa giggled quietly, her mind already running through the numbers. Zachary told me his parents are only pitching in a tiny, minor fraction for the venue, and his idea of a starter home is a chipped paint, outdated fixer-upper. Thank God Aunt Susan and Uncle Mark are such incredibly soft-hearted, gullible idiots. Aunt Brenda scoffed darkly, a cruel smirk evident in her tone. They've used their money to feed, clothe, and educate you for 12 long years. If they didn't bleed a massive chunk of cash for your wedding day, it would look absolutely monstrous to the rest of the family. Years ago, I dumped you on their doorstep precisely because I knew your aunt was an absolute pushover. Her paying for your life gave me a completely light, stress-free break all these years. Vanessa let out a sigh of pure anticipation. Mom, I've already mapped out the ledger. Once the wedding fund hits our account, we buy the BMW first. The remainder stays locked in my private personal fund, and we can use it to finance luxury road trips around the country. I'll drive you everywhere, and our whole biological family can finally live the high life together. I stood motionless in the pitch-black corridor, my knuckles turning white as my fingers tightly gripped the glass of water in my hand. Turning around quietly, I walked away from the room and retreated back into the sanctuary of my bedroom, where a sharp beam of light was still cutting through the bottom of my parents' door. Suddenly, the screen of my smartphone illuminated the darkness. It was a brief text message from my father. "Rest assured, Chloe. Your mother and I know exactly what we are doing." Staring at those words, the lingering anxiety inside me dissolved, replaced by a cold, unwavering determination. The countdown had begun, and all I needed to do now was play my part and wait for the perfect moment to strike. The early morning light had barely broken through the blinds when Vanessa's voice shattered the quiet house. I woke up to the sound of her calling Zachary, her tone vibrating with an unprecedented level of arrogance and excitement. "Oh my God, babe, don't worry about a thing." Vanessa bragged loudly into her phone, pacing around the living room. My aunt completely folded. The $60,000 is as good as ours, not a single penny missing. My mom told me that this money is going to be my ultimate financial backing. She paused, letting out a sharp, high-pitched laugh. "The car. Absolutely, we're getting it. It has to be a BMW. I've been eyeing the white BMW 3 Series for months, and it will match my new designer coat flawlessly. A loan? Who cares? With the wedding fund as our starting capital, we can easily pay off the financing later. Once the car is taken care of, I'm customizing the entire interior of our house to match my exact aesthetic. I lay in bed, listening to her eagerly map out how she was going to spend my parents' hard-earned savings to fund a luxury lifestyle for herself and her fiancé. My stomach literally churned with disgust. When I finally opened my bedroom door, Vanessa was just hanging up, her face flushed red with adrenaline. Seeing me, she arrogantly smirked and offered a rare, condescending greeting. "Hey, Chloe, you're finally awake. Did I make too much noise for you?" Before I could even open my mouth, she seamlessly kept talking, her voice dripping with passive-aggressive boasting. "Zachary is completely thrilled. He said his parents are so impressed by how much my family values me. By the way, Chloe, do you think I should get the standard BMW 3 Series or the premium package? The premium upgrade has a panoramic sunroof and genuine leather seats." I stared at her, my expression completely stone cold. "Vanessa," I cut her off, my voice deadpan, "that money hasn't actually touched your hands yet." The triumphant smile on her face froze for a split second, but she quickly recovered, tossing her head back with a careless shrug. "It's a done deal anyway. Aunt Susan and Uncle Mark already gave their silent approval. It's not like they can suddenly back out on their word now, right?" She stepped closer, a subtle, hidden look of deep disdain flashing in her eyes. "Why do you look so miserable? I know it's a massive chunk of change, but we've been sisters for 12 years. What's mine is yours, Chloe. Once I marry into high society and have financial leverage, I won't forget to throw you a bone. Besides, Zachary's corporate firm is filled with wealthy, eligible bachelors." "I don't need it," I snapped, completely cutting her off as I turned around, marched back into my room, and slammed the door shut. The absolute audacity of using my parents' life savings to buy her own vanity, only to turn around and act like she was going to grant me charity, was the biggest joke on earth. By Tuesday evening, the entitlement escalated. Aunt Brenda walked through our front door carrying a cheap, discounted bag of grocery store fruit, her loud voice instantly filling the foyer. "Susan, Mark, we need to finalize the financial transfers immediately. Zachary's parents are breathing down our necks." The two of them sat side by side on our sofa, their eyes flashing with absolute greed and anticipation. Vanessa proudly pulled out a small leather-bound notebook and began presenting her itemized wedding expense report. "I've calculated everything meticulously over the last few days," Vanessa announced grandly. "The flat $60,000 in cash is the core wedding fund, and that remains entirely untouched for the main venue. Now, regarding the 3 designer gold jewelry pieces, gold prices are soaring right now, but they are a non-negotiable requirement. The custom necklace, the heavy bracelet, and the diamond earrings are easily going to cost another $10,000. So for that specific bill. Are we supposed to pay for all of that too?" I finally spoke up, stepping into the living room, my voice laced with ice-cold irritation. Vanessa's presentation was abruptly interrupted. She whipped her head around, glaring at me with absolute fury and venom. "This money is obviously paid by the bride's side. Do you honestly expect the bride to pay for her own jewelry? If Zachary's high society relatives found out, they would laugh at us until their teeth fell out. If you don't understand how luxury weddings work, Chloe, stop talking absolute nonsense." She quickly turned back to my parents, her tone instantly melting into a sweet, calculated whimper. "Aunt Susan, Uncle Mark, just think about it logically. The core fund plus the custom jewelry brings us to $70,000. But I'm marrying into a prominent circle. I need a decent bridal wardrobe. The designer wedding gown, the reception dress, the custom shoes, the luxury lingerie. All those small details easily add up to another $5,000, which is completely reasonable. Plus, I already booked a premium bridal skincare package and hired a celebrity makeup artist to shadow me throughout the entire wedding day so I look absolutely flawless. That package alone is another $2,000. Aunt Brenda chimed in immediately, nodding frantically to back up the extortion. "Exactly. A girl only gets married once, you cannot afford to be tight-fisted. Mark, if we look at the raw numbers, the total is pushing past 75,000. Since the family isn't exactly struggling, let's just round it up to a flat $80,000 for Vanessa's wedding fund. Marrying a daughter off with an $80,000 backing brings so much face and status to this household. The heavy silence that followed Aunt Brenda's outrageous demand for a flat $80,000 was loud and suffocating. The enthusiastic smiles on my cousin and aunt's faces slowly began to harden into rigid masks as they nervously looked back and forth between my parents. Finally, my mother broke the tension, her eyes locking onto Aunt Brenda. "Brenda, Vanessa is getting married," my mother said, her voice entirely calm. "As her biological mother, how much are you personally planning to contribute to this fund?" Aunt Brenda completely froze, a sudden wave of deep embarrassment slipping across her face before she quickly tried to brush it off with a defensive laugh. "Oh, Susan, come on, you already know my situation," she stammered, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm a jobless widow. Where on earth would I get that kind of cash? Vanessa has lived under your roof for 12 years, and it breaks my heart that I couldn't even afford her basic living expenses all this time. Aren't we all just counting on you and Mark to step up and give us a hand? Once Vanessa marries into high society, there's no way she'll ever forget your generosity." It was the exact same, exhausting routine she had weaponized for over a decade. Right on cue, Vanessa chimed in, her eyes instantly turning red as fake tears well up. "Aunt Susan, Uncle Mark, I know exactly how much I owe this family," she whimpered, her voice cracking perfectly. "I promise I will be deeply devoted to you both and pay you back for raising me. Please, just help me this one last time, I am begging you." Before anyone could stop her, Vanessa abruptly bolted upright from the sofa, dropping to her knees on the rug as if she were about to throw herself at my parents' feet. "Vanessa, what do you think you're doing? Stand up right now," my mother ordered, her brow furrowing deeply in irritation. Vanessa froze mid-movement, swallowing her tears as she heavily sank back onto the couch, pouting with a pitiful, pathetic expression. My father stared at her, his eyes clouded with a complex mixture of exhaustion and disappointment. He let out a long, heavy sigh. "All right, that's enough crying," he muttered, his voice flat. "Let your aunt and me discuss this thoroughly before making a final decision." To my father, it was a stall tactic to buy space. But to Aunt Brenda and Vanessa, the phrase "discuss this thoroughly" was practically a green light of victory. Vanessa's tears vanished instantly, replaced by a grateful, triumphant grin. Aunt Brenda let out a massive sigh of relief, quickly chuckling as she gathered her things. "Yes, of course. Take all the time you need to talk it over, Mark. No rush at all. So, we'll consider it a done deal then." Nobody answered her. But in their world of unchecked greed, our silence was always interpreted as absolute submission. By Sunday afternoon, an unexpected opportunity arrived. My parents received an urgent corporate notification requiring them to travel out of town for a business trip, meaning they wouldn't return until late Wednesday evening. For the first 24 hours after their departure, Vanessa maintained her sweet, well-behaved act around the house. But by Monday afternoon, the absolute moment she realized the cats were away, her true, destructive nature was unleashed. The moment I unlocked the front door after finishing my college classes, a thick, greasy, and overwhelming odor of boiling hot pot hit me like a physical wall. Walking into our pristine living room, my jaw practically dropped. Vanessa was sitting in the center of the lounge, completely surrounded by 3 rowdy strangers, 2 girls and a guy with bleached blonde hair, laughing and drinking loudly around a portable electric stove. The entire space was a total disaster area. Empty beer cans were rolling across our expensive hardwood floors, the custom sofa pillows had been thrown carelessly onto the ground, and the glass surface of the coffee table was completely smeared with dark grease stains and spilled broth. "Oh, you're back," Vanessa called out, her mouth glistening with oil as she casually waved a hand at me. "Grab a plate and join the party." The blonde guy let out a sharp, mocking whistle. "So this is Vanessa's straight-A cousin. She's definitely a looker. Does she have a boyfriend?" I completely ignored his comment, keeping my expression deadpan. The two girls turned back to Vanessa, their voices dripping with superficial flattery. "Oh my God, Vanessa, your house is literally massive. And it's right in the center of the downtown district. This place must have cost an absolute fortune." Vanessa let out a smug, falsely modest giggle, waving her hand as if she owned the title deed. "Well, technically it belongs to my aunt, but I've lived here for so long it's basically my house anyway. You guys can come over whenever you want, seriously, just treat it like your own place." Numbing myself against the rising fury in my chest, I retreated into my bedroom, only to find the destruction had breached my sanctuary. My heavy, expensive bar exam prep textbooks had been swept off my desk and thrown onto the floor to make room for a messy layout of Vanessa's nail polishes and cosmetics. Worse, when I picked up my multi-$100 law books, the covers were completely ruined, stained with thick, greasy fingerprint marks from her friends. Grabbing the ruined books, I marched straight back out into the loud living room and confronted her. "Vanessa!" I barked, my voice flat and dangerous. She was currently clinking her beer can against the blonde guy's glass, and when she looked up and saw the text in my hand, she merely rolled her eyes. There wasn't enough counter space out here, so we moved them for a second," she claimed carelessly, turning her back to me. "Just wipe it off, it's not a big deal." "These are my bar exam prep books," I stated, each syllable laced with freezing venom. "It's literally just a book." Vanessa snapped, her patience completely evaporating as she glared at me in front of her crowd. "Chloe, stop actively ruining the vibe, okay? My friends are over." The blonde guy rolled his eyes, looking at me with a heavy sneer. "Yeah, seriously, it's just an old, worn-out book. Vanessa, your cousin is a total drag." I stared at Vanessa for 3 long, silent seconds, recording her face, before turning around, walking back into my room, and locking the door firmly behind me. A massive, mocking burst of laughter erupted from the living room the moment my door shut. I sat on the edge of my bed, my fingers tightly digging into the sheets as the chaotic noise bled through the walls. They thought they were running the house, but they had absolutely no idea that every single boundary they crossed was just bringing them closer to the ledge. By Tuesday, the situation inside the house had deteriorated from mere disrespect to an unhinged takeover. Vanessa had gone so far as to invite Aunt Brenda over, along with a handful of their other extended maternal relatives. The entire entourage sat packed into our living room, laughing rowdy and gossiping endlessly, while a mountain of sunflower seed shells was carelessly spit all over the pristine rugs. They didn't just confine their chaotic presence to the common areas, either. Vanessa actively took it upon herself to lead her relatives on a grand tour of the upper floor, treating my parents' property like a tourist attraction. "This is my cousin's bedroom. It easily has the absolute best natural lighting and square footage in the entire house." I heard Vanessa bragging loudly from the hallway as she pushed open my door. "But honestly, she's graduating and moving out pretty soon anyway, so after she leaves, this room." I didn't catch the tail end of her sentence, but the moment I threw my door open to confront them, I froze. An older maternal aunt was actively reaching out, her fingers mindlessly rummaging through the personal items on my bookshelf. "Oh, wow, look at all these massive textbooks," the woman mused aloud with a greedy squint. "If we haul these down to a used bookstore, we could probably flip them for a decent chunk of cash, right?" Vanessa let out a dismissive, airy chuckle. "Oh, absolutely. They're honestly just a bunch of useless academic garbage anyway, once we get rid of them." She caught sight of my icy glare and cut herself off, though her face didn't betray a single ounce of shame. Instead, she puffed out her chest and raised her voice. "Chloe, seriously, what is up with that sudden creepy entrance? You completely scared the life out of me. Who gave any of you authorization to step foot inside my private bedroom?" I demanded, my voice cutting through the room like a razor-sharp blade. Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms as she dug her heels into the floor. "We are literally just looking around for a brief second. It's not like anything is mysteriously missing or broken, so why are you making such an unnecessary scene?" Aunt Brenda stepped up from the back of the tour group, pushing her way to the front with an irritated huff. Chloe, seriously, why must you always be so incredibly small-minded and dramatic? Your own extended family comes over to visit, which brings immense life and blessing to this household, and this is how you act. I stood my ground, staring directly into the eyes of the parasite standing in my sanctuary. I looked at the absolute strangers dirtying our home and at the one spotless space that now felt entirely violated and filthy. "Get out," I stated flatly. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" Vanessa TR letter 1EBNGI at me, her jaw tightening. "I told every single one of you to get the hell out of my room," I repeated, emphasizing every single word with a chilling, mechanical precision. Right now. The ambient noise in the upper hallway died instantly. Every relative turned their head, staring at me in absolute, stunned silence. Vanessa's face violently flushed a deep, ugly crimson, her voice snapping into a high-pitched, defensive shriek. "Chloe Miller, who do you think you are talking to with that disgusting attitude? This is my house too. I have lived here for 12 years, and I will do whatever the hell I want. Honestly, the absolute second I secure my massive wedding fund from your parents, I am packing my bags and leaving, and I won't ever look back at this place anyway." She spun around on her heel, barking to her relatives to keep moving. "Don't even worry about her, guys. My cousin is clearly just in a miserable, toxic mood. Let's go check out the rest of the layout." I stood entirely still, watching their backs as they retreated down the stairs. The moment they cleared the area, I pulled out my phone, snapped a dozen high-definition photos of the ruined textbooks, the grease-stained coffee table, and the absolute wreck they had made of our home, and sent them directly to my mother. Within less than 2 minutes, a brief, definitive reply illuminated my screen. "Wednesday." Just one word. I quietly locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. As I shut my bedroom door to isolate myself, Vanessa's arrogant, booming voice carried from the downstairs kitchen, broadcasting her greed for the entire neighborhood to hear. "The second the cash clears tomorrow, I am personally taking everyone out to that brand new luxury steakhouse downtown for a massive celebratory feast. Order whatever you want, the sky is the limit." Another loud, obnoxious burst of family laughter followed. I leaned against my door, closing my eyes in the dark. Wednesday. Just 24 hours left. The parasitic celebration finally wrapped up around 11 o'clock that night, the front door slamming shut as the relatives left. But the true climax of their entitlement was waiting in the dead of night. Around 2:00 a.m., I woke up to grab a glass of water and immediately noticed that the master bedroom door, my parents' private room, was resting slightly ajar. From the pitch-black interior, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound was echoing out into the hallway. My heart tightened into a cold knot. Moving like a ghost, I pushed the door open wide and flicked the overhead light switch. The sudden, blinding illumination caught Vanessa red-handed. She was sitting flat on her knees directly in front of my mother's private vanity closet, her hands frantically digging through a hidden wooden compartment. Caught completely off guard, she gasped loudly, accidentally dropping the item clutched in her fingers onto the floor. It was my mother's velvet heirloom jewelry box. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" I demanded, stepping into the room. Vanessa scrambled to her feet, her breathing erratic, but within a fraction of a second, her panic melted right back into a defensive, arrogant scowl. "I am literally just looking for something, Chloe," she lied through her teeth, crossing her arms. "You're looking for something by breaking into my parents' private closet and digging through my mother's jewelry box." I countered, bending down to pick up the velvet case. I opened it, ensuring everything was intact. Inside sat the irreplaceable pieces of our family history, a vintage brooch my mother bought with her very first corporate paycheck, and a delicate silver bracelet passed down from my grandmother. I literally just wanted to letter 1B0, letter 1E3, and a silk scarf. Vanessa barked back defensively, raising her voice to drown out her guilt. "I have to meet with Zachary's parents tomorrow morning for a high society brunch, and I need to look completely put together and elegant. My aunt isn't even home right now, so it's not like I could ask. What, am I supposed to show up looking like a peasant in my old clothes? So that gives you the right to ransack a private bedroom." "Ransack what?" Vanessa snapped, taking an aggressive step toward me, her chest heaving with rage. "Chloe, you are actively, intentionally trying to cause a massive fight with me. Ever since we were children, whenever I borrow a single thing in this house, you throw a massive tantrum. Now you're seriously going to police what I borrow from my own aunt's closet." "This isn't borrowing," I replied, my voice dangerously calm as I looked her dead in the eye. "This is grand larceny. This is theft. You—" Vanessa choked on her own breath, her finger pointing directly at my face. "How dare you say that to my face one more time? Do I need to dial 911 and let the local police department handle this?" I asked smoothly, pulling my smartphone out of my pocket. Vanessa's expression faltered for a brief second, but she immediately let out a loud, mocking laugh to mask her terror. "Call them. Go ahead and dial the police. Let's see what they actually do. I have lived as a daughter under this roof for 12 years. How on earth is taking items from my own family home considered stealing?" I looked at the weeping, defensive creature standing before me, and a wave of profound, clinical pity washed over me. 12 years. My parents had sacrificed over a decade to nurture, feed, and educate this girl, and this rotting, ungrateful monster was the ultimate return on their investment. "Are you finished talking?" I asked quietly. She KH letter 1EF1NG back, momentarily stunned by my absolute lack of an emotional reaction. "If you're completely finished with your tantrum, put every single item back exactly where you found it, and get out of this room," I commanded, pointing a single finger toward the open door. Vanessa glared at me with pure, unadulterated venom. With a sharp, furious huff, she violently snatched the velvet jewelry box from the counter, jammed it carelessly back onto the closet shelf, and slammed the master bedroom door shut behind her as she stormed out. I stood completely alone in the quiet room, taking a deep breath before slowly, meticulously organizing my mother's clothes and locking the vanity cabinets. As I finished, my phone screen vibrated in my palm. It was a final, automated tracking update from my father's travel app, followed by a personal text. "Flight lands tomorrow at noon." I closed the phone, looking out the glass window at the dark, silent city skyline. Tomorrow. The calculation was complete, the ledger was balanced, and the final curtain was about to fall on their 12-year performance. On Wednesday afternoon, the front door lock turned with a crisp, heavy click, and my parents finally walked back through the threshold. The suffocating, hostile tension that had been building inside the house for the past 48 hours seemed to shift instantly. Vanessa literally cascaded out of her bedroom the moment she heard the luggage wheels rolling across the hardwood floor, her face instantly morphing into a brilliant, radiant mask of absolute joy. The lazy, destructive monster who had spent the last 2 days ordering her friends around and trashing the property was completely gone. In her place stood the image of a perfect, deeply devoted daughter. "Aunt Susan, Uncle Mark, you guys are finally back." Vanessa squealed with an exaggerated, sugary sweetness, sprinting down the stairs to intercept them. She aggressively snatched the heavy rolling suitcase from my father's grip and reached over to haul the designer travel bag off my mother's shoulder, practically vibrating with frantic energy. "Oh my God, traveling for corporate business must have been absolutely exhausting for you both. Come sit down in the living room right now. Let me pour you some fresh ice water." Aunt Brenda stepped out from the lounge right behind her, a wide, sycophantic grin stretching across her face as she smoothed down her shirt. "Welcome home, you two." She chimed in, her voice dripping with an artificial, oily flattery. "Did the business meetings go smoothly, Mark? Everything successful?" My father let out a tired, non-committal grunt, slipping off his leather dress shoes and stepping into his house slippers. His sharp, analytical eyes slowly panned across the living room. The space had been frantically wiped down and staged to look completely pristine just an hour before their arrival. But the faint, greasy odor of the commercial hot pot from the night before still lingered stubbornly in the air. His gaze swept over Vanessa's eager, trembling hands, shifted past Aunt Brenda's desperate, masking smile, and finally locked onto me as I stood quietly by the hallway. I quietly closed my study binder and stepped forward into the room. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly level. My mother walked past Vanessa's extended arms, giving my shoulder a gentle, grounding pat. There was a profound, unreadable expression settling deep within her eyes, a quiet, calculation-heavy focus that I recognized instantly. Vanessa frantically rushed into the kitchen, returning seconds later to place 2 sweating glasses of ice water onto the coffee table with absolute, breathless urgency. "Aunt Susan, Uncle Mark, please drink some water." Aunt Brenda eagerly rubbed her palms together, sliding onto the edge of the armchair, completely unable to contain her financial desperation any longer. "So, Mark," she ventured, her eyes wide and tracking his every movement. "Now that you're back from the trip, I assume all the final arrangements and financial allocations for Vanessa's wedding are completely locked down and ready to go." Vanessa leaned forward, her chest heaving slightly as she stared at my father with absolute, trembling anticipation. My father took a slow, deliberate sip of the water, placing the glass back onto the table with a soft, echoing thud. He leaned back into the sofa, his eyes cold and unblinking as he looked directly at the 2 women sitting across from him. "Regarding the wedding fund, your aunt and I have discussed the matter thoroughly," my father began, his tone entirely even, stripped of any discernible warmth or anger. "After all, we have raised Vanessa under this roof for 12 long years. A once-in-a-lifetime milestone like her marriage is something we simply cannot ignore." The moment those words left his mouth, an ugly, brilliant spark of absolute triumph erupted in Vanessa's eyes. Her face violently flushed a deep, ecstatic red as she practically gasped for air. Beside her, Aunt Brenda let out a massive, theatrical sigh of relief, aggressively patting her own chest as if she had just conquered a mountain. "I knew it. I absolutely knew it." Aunt Brenda boasted loudly, her voice filled with an instant, arrogant inflation. "Susan and Mark are the most logical, upstanding people in this family. They always understand proper social status." Vanessa completely lost her restraint, blurting out her greed before my father could even finish. "So, Aunt Susan, Uncle Mark, when exactly can we expect the cash transfer to clear into my account? Zachary's family is breathing down my neck, and we are literally planning to head straight to the luxury dealership next week to sign the papers for the white BMW." My mother finally raised her hand, her voice soft but possessing a freezing clarity that immediately cut through the excitement. "There is no rush, Vanessa. Sit back down and compose yourself." Vanessa quickly sank back into the cushions, her fingers twisting together in an erratic, hyperactive knot of suspense. My mother reached into her structured leather briefcase and slowly pulled out a thick, heavy brown paper folder. Vanessa's eyes instantly locked onto the document, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid as she tracked the path of the folder. In her mind, she was already visualizing the pristine gold banking card or the multi-thousand-dollar corporate certified check waiting inside. But as my mother unwrapped the string enclosure and slid the document out, a bright, distinctive crimson cover slid into view. It was a brand-new real estate deed, the gold-embossed seal of the city registry shimmering sharply under the dining room lights. Vanessa's pupils dilated to the absolute limit, her voice cracking violently into a breathless, panicked stammer. A real estate deed. You didn't just fund the wedding, you actually bought an entire house for me. Oh my God, Aunt Susan, this is. I don't even know what to say. This makes me so incredibly embarrassed. It's just so expensive." She was completely hyperventilating, her posture trembling with an insatiable, ecstatic greed as she eagerly thrust her manicured fingers across the coffee table, reaching out to grab the crimson folder. But right at the exact millimeter her fingernails were about to touch the paper, my mother's wrist executed a smooth, effortless, and lightning-fast rotation. She swept the folder backward, completely bypassing Vanessa's reaching hand in a single, devastating movement. And while Vanessa froze midair, her jaw dropping in absolute, stunned incomprehension, my mother calmly slid the pristine real estate deed across the polished wood table, placing it directly into my open hands. A premium, luxury apartment located squarely in the center of the downtown district, fully paid off in cash, my mother announced, her voice carrying a terrifying, rhythmic calm that echoed through the silent lounge. The title deed is registered exclusively under Chloe's name. Consider it her permanent wedding gift from her father and me. I gripped the smooth, heavy cardstock of the deed, opening the front leaf. There it was, printed in bold, undeniable legal font. Primary owner and sole title holder, Chloe Miller. Date of official recording, yesterday afternoon. The heavy silence that followed my mother's announcement was thick, suffocating, and absolute. The crimson cover of the real estate deed seemed to gleam like an open flame on the polished mahogany table, casting a harsh light on the sudden, violent shift in the room's atmosphere. For 3 agonizing seconds, Vanessa's hands remained frozen midair, her fingers still curled in the exact shape of the greed that had driven her to reach for the paper. Her eyes darted from the document, now safely resting in my palms, up to my mother's impassive face, and finally over to me. The ecstatic, triumphant flush that had colored her cheeks moments ago drained away in an instant, leaving her skin a sickly, mottled white. Beside her, Aunt Brenda looked as if she had been physically struck. Her smug, relaxed posture vanished, her spine snapping straight as her jaw dropped in utter, paralyzed disbelief. "Deedontown," Vanessa finally stammered, her voice cracking so violently it barely carried across the space. She dropped her hands, her manicured nails digging into her own knees as she leaned over the table, her gaze locked onto the deed in my hands with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. A luxury apartment, fully paid off. "Yes," my mother replied, her voice carrying the terrifying, rhythmic calm of a seasoned auditor. She didn't blink. She didn't shift in her seat. She simply sat there, watching the mask slip completely off her niece's face. Then, the panic turned into pure, unhinged fury. Vanessa bolted upright from the sofa, her chair screeching harshly against the hardwood floor. The sweet, docile, high society persona she had meticulously practiced for the last 12 years shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Her face violently flushed an ugly, dark crimson, and her chest heaved as she pointed a trembling, accusation-heavy finger at my parents. "Aunt Susan. Uncle Mark." Vanessa shrieked, her voice rising to a sharp, defensive state that echoed painfully off the dining room walls. "What the hell is the meaning of this? What about my wedding fund? What about my $80,000? Aunt Brenda jumped to her feet right beside her daughter, her face lining with a deep, defensive rage. She slammed her palm onto the coffee table, rattling the 2 glasses of ice water. "Susan, Mark, have you both completely lost your minds?" Brenda yelled, her voice dripping with an oily, vicious indignation. "You stood right there before your trip and told us you would discuss it thoroughly. We laid out exactly what Vanessa needed to maintain status with Zachary's high society circle. And you turn around, take your corporate savings, and buy a luxury condo for Chloe. How could you do this to me?" Vanessa screamed, tears of pure, frustrated greed finally spilling over her eyelids. She began pacing the rug, her hands clawing at her hair. "Zachary's family is expecting me to bring a prominent financial backing to this marriage. I already told him the money was as good as ours. I told him we were buying the white BMW next week. How am I supposed to look him in the eye now? You are completely ruining my life. You are making me look like a pathetic, penniless fraud in front of high society." I sat entirely still, my fingers firmly gripping the heavy cardstock of my new title deed. I watched them spin out into absolute madness, a cold, quiet satisfaction settling deep into my chest. They genuinely believed their loud, dramatic performance could force my parents to back down. They thought that if they screamed loud enough about family duty and status, my mother and dad would cave just to keep the peace. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. My mother didn't flinch at the shouting. Instead, she slowly reached down, picked up her glass of ice water, and took a deliberate, quiet sip. The mechanical precision of her movements only seemed to drive Vanessa further to the brink of insanity. "Vanessa," my mother said softly, placing the glass back down with a soft, definitive thud. "At what specific moment during our last conversation did your uncle or I ever state that we would provide you with an $80,000 wedding fund. Vanessa KH letter 1EF1NG back, her breathless rambling cutting off instantly as she stared at my mother, her jaw tightening. You didn't say no. She argued defensively, her voice rising in pitch. Uncle Mark told me to stop crying and said you two would talk it over. In this family, when you don't say no to an orphan who has lived under your roof for 12 years, it means you agree. It was a silent approval. Is that the logic your mother taught you? My mother countered, her sharp eyes locking onto Aunt Brenda, who shifted uncomfortably under the gaze. Because from where Mark and I are sitting, the only people talking, calculating, and deciding how to spend our hard-earned corporate assets were the two of you. You did this on purpose. Vanessa hissed, her eyes locking onto me with absolute venom. You planned this whole thing just to see me crawl. You wanted to watch me look like a clown in front of Zachary's family. I have spent over a decade in this house being a perfect daughter to you both. I comforted you, I brought life to this household, I treated you like my real parents. And you have never, not for 1 second, considered me real family. She took a massive, aggressive step toward the table, her voice dropping into a dark, transactional threat. I am telling you right now, if you don't transfer that wedding fund into my account by tomorrow morning, I am completely cutting ties with this entire household. Don't you ever expect me to show you an ounce of devotion or care for you when you're old and helpless. You will mean absolutely nothing to me. Before Vanessa could even finish her desperate threat, my mother reached back into her structured leather briefcase. Her expression remained entirely unbothered, stripped of any emotional reaction. You don't need to worry about our old age, Vanessa, my mother stated with a chilling, clinical calmness. Because as of today, this family officially owes you absolutely nothing. With a smooth, decisive movement, my mother pulled a thick, heavy, professionally bound book from her briefcase and slid it squarely into the center of the mahogany table. The book was bound in a stark, professional black cover. Printed across the front leaf in bold, undeniable legal font were 8 words that made Vanessa's breath catch completely in her throat. Itemized expense ledger for Vanessa Miller, 2014-2026. What is that? Aunt Brenda stammered, her eyes widening as she stared at the heavy binder. It's a ledger, Brenda, my father finally spoke up, his deep, baritone voice carrying a terrifying weight that instantly commanded the room. He leaned forward, his analytical gaze locking the two women in place. As you both know, Susan has worked as a senior corporate accountant for over 25 years. It is her professional habit to track every single financial allocation that passes through our accounts. My mother reached forward and flipped the black binder open to the very first page, revealing a beautifully organized, multi-column spreadsheet, packed to the absolute margin with dates, descriptions, categories, and exact monetary figures. Meticulous tracking, my mother explained, her finger tracing the top line. From the very first night your mother dumped you on our doorstep 12 years ago, Vanessa, I have recorded every single penny this household has spent to maintain your life. Every tuition payment for your private high school. Every medical bill, dental cleaning, and set of braces. Every clothing allowance, school lunch, prom dress, and textbook. And finally, the exact dollar amount of your fully funded 4-year university degree. Vanessa stepped forward, her hands trembling violently as she snatched the book off the table, her eyes frantically scanning the dense columns of data. Her face turned from a dark crimson to a ghostly, hollow white as she realized the sheer, mathematical finality of the document in her hands. There were entries for things she had entirely forgotten: a $40 graphing calculator from middle school, a $200 winter coat from her freshman year of college, a $50 fee for a high school track meet. Everything was documented, cross-referenced, and backed by digital corporate archives. And at the very bottom of the final page, printed in a thick, bold line, was the absolute grand total of her 12-year residency. Total outstanding balance, $156,700. $156,700, my father repeated, his voice dropping into a dangerous, freezing tone. "That is the exact cost of our generosity, Vanessa. So before you stand in our living room and demand another $80,000 for your social climbing vanity, let's look at the ledger. Today, we are going to calculate exactly who owes who." The heavy black ledger felt like an anchor in Vanessa's hands, dragging whatever remained of her high society delusions straight down into the floorboards. Aunt Brenda snatched the binder away from her daughter, her eyes frantically darting across the columns of numbers, her face twisting into a mask of pure denial. "This is a lie. It's all a sick, twisted fabrication." Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking as she slammed the ledger back onto the mahogany table. "You two have been planning this. You've been plotting for years to trap my daughter and humiliate us." My father stood up. The sheer physical presence of Mark Miller, a man who had navigated the cutthroat corporate landscape for over 2 decades, instantly altered the geometry of the room. He didn't raise his voice, but the freezing, absolute authority in his tone caused Aunt Brenda to instinctively take a step back. "You dare stand in my home and talk about plots, Brenda?" My father asked, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure ice. "Let's talk about 12 years ago. Your husband passed, and you came crawling to our doorstep, sobbing that you couldn't afford to put food in Vanessa's mouth. Out of pure, soft-hearted stupidity, Susan and I took your daughter in. We gave her a life. And what did you do?" He took a step closer to the coffee table. "You moved back to your small town, spent your days drinking, gambling, and leeching off your friends, while my wife and I financed every square inch of your child's existence. You dumped her on us like a piece of unwanted luggage so you could live a stress-free, single life, and you haven't contributed a single dollar to her upkeep in over a decade. And now, the moment she finds a wealthy man, you crawl back out of the woodwork to demand an $80,000 payoff for a wedding you aren't paying a dime for. Where is your shame, Brenda?" Aunt Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her face violently flushing an ugly purple, but she couldn't summon a single syllable to defend herself. Seeing her mother utterly defeated, Vanessa dropped all pretense of the sweet, sophisticated bride. Her tears turned hot and venomous, her posture turning rigid with unhinged malice. "So what if you spent the money?" Vanessa screamed, stamping her foot onto the rug. "You did it willingly. You spent it because you wanted to look like the grand, charitable saviors of the family, and now you're weaponizing a stupid notebook to ruin my future right when it matters most." She dropped flat onto her knees right there on the living room rug, throwing her hands in the air, embarking on a theatrical, hysterical tantrum. "Fine, you want your money. I'll give you your damn money later. But you are giving me that $80,000 wedding fund today. Consider it an advance on my future gratitude. If you don't give it to me, I'm not leaving this house. I will swallow a bottle of pills and die right here on your floor, and it will be your fault." My mother didn't even look up from her glass of water. The sheer lack of an emotional reaction from our family drove Vanessa into an absolute panic. Realizing the victim routine was dead, she bolted back to her feet, her eyes turning bloodshot and wild. "You think you're so untouchable," Vanessa hissed, a hideous, transactional sneer replacing her tears. "If I don't get that money, I will destroy you. I will march straight into your corporate headquarters, Uncle Mark. I will go to Chloe's law school campus and post all over their online boards. I will tell everyone in this high-end neighborhood that you are wealthy, abusive monsters who starved and exploited an orphan for 12 years until she tried to end her life. Let's see how much your precious corporate status and Chloe's fancy legal career are worth when I make you completely toxic." Aunt Brenda completely threw her lot in with her daughter, crossing her arms and cackling maliciously. "That's right. Let's play dirty. We have absolutely nothing to lose, Mark. We don't have a reputation to protect, but you do. We will drag your names through the absolute mud until you're completely ruined." The threats were vile, calculated, and designed to induce compliance through fear. But my father merely reached into his pocket, pulled out his silver cigarette case, and slowly tapped a cigarette against the metal before sparking it. He exhaled a thin stream of gray smoke, looking at them with a clinical, detached pity. "Extortion is a very heavy charge, Brenda. my mother said smoothly, reaching into her leather bag and pulling out her corporate smartphone. "But before you begin your public relations campaign, I think there is a piece of media you should listen to." My mother tapped the glass screen, and a digital audio file began to play. Instantly, the ambient noise in our living room suffocated to death. From the phone's high-definition speaker, Vanessa and Aunt Brenda's own unmistakable voices filled the room, echoing with a sickening, crisp clarity. "Mom, did you see Chloe's pathetic face at the table tonight? She looked like she had literally swallowed a fly. All it took was a few soft, submissive words from me, and she was completely silenced." Thank God Aunt Susan and Uncle Mark are such incredibly soft-hearted, gullible idiots. The only thing that matters is getting that corporate funding into our hands. Once that cash transfers, who cares what kind of miserable faces they make? Once the wedding fund hits our account, we buy the BMW first. The remainder stays locked in my private personal fund. They won't have any value left to exploit anyway. My mother pressed pause. Vanessa's entire body went completely rigid, her skin changing from white to an ash-gray, dead hue. Her lips trembled so violently she looked like she was losing the ability to form words. "Why you recorded us," she whispered, her voice shattering into a frantic panic. "Did you honestly think we were blind to the venom you've been harboring under our roof, Vanessa?" My father asked, his voice slamming down like a judge's gavel. "We raised you for 12 years, not to fund a high-society luxury lifestyle, and certainly not to nurture a spineless, ungrateful viper." He stepped forward, towering directly over the trembling girl. "You want to talk about status? You think I built a successful corporation over 25 years by being a pushover. I happen to be personal friends with the senior executive board at Zachary's parents' investment firm. I know exactly who they are, and I know exactly how much they value ancestral repute and financial stability." He leaned in, his eyes locking onto Vanessa's dilated pupils. "So here is your ultimatum. There are exactly 2 paths left for you tonight. Option 1, you and your mother sit at that mahogany table, and you sign a legally binding promissory note agreeing to repay the full $156,700 over an itemized monthly schedule. Out of sheer pity for our bloodline, we won't enforce immediate collection." My father's expression darkened into something truly terrifying. "Option 2, you walk out that door, or you utter one more single threat, and my corporate legal team will file a massive civil lawsuit for asset recovery by tomorrow morning. Furthermore, I will hand this audio recording, along with the photos of the property damage you caused this week, directly to the local police for criminal extortion. And out of personal courtesy, I will ensure a copy of that exact audio file lands directly on the desks of Zachary's parents before breakfast." "No," Vanessa choked out, dropping to her knees again, but this time the terror was entirely real. She reached out to grab my father's trousers, but he stepped back, leaving her clutching empty air. "Uncle Mark, please, I'm sorry. I swear to God I didn't mean it. I was just angry. I was just stupid. Please don't send that to Zachary's family. If his parents hear that, the wedding is over. My whole life will be completely ruined." "Choose," my father demanded, his voice mechanical and cold. Through frantic, breathless sobs of pure humiliation, Vanessa looked up at the table where my mother had already laid out a crisp sheet of legal paper and a black ink pen. Her dreams of a high-society wedding, a white BMW, and an easy luxury life dissolved into the ink before her. Shaking violently, she dragged herself to the table, took the pen, and signed her name on the dotted line. The crisp scraping of the pen against the legal paper finally ceased, leaving a jagged, permanent signature at the bottom of the promissory note. Vanessa dropped the pen as if it had burned her face completely hollowed out by the sheer, crushing weight of the debt she had just legally accepted. I stepped forward from the shadows of the hallway, looking down at the broken, trembling girl who had spent the last 12 years treating our kindness like an open checkbook. I looked at Vanessa standing there with her head lowered, and I couldn't help remembering our high school years. Back then, she desperately wanted a $3,000 designer dress. Feeling sorry for her, I spent my own scholarship money to buy it. When she received it, She hugged me and promised she would always stand by my side. But when $60,000 in wedding money was suddenly within reach, she was willing to lie about me and betray the very family that had raised and supported her for 12 years. My mother had finally had enough. She coldly ordered Aunt Brenda and Vanessa to leave our house immediately and cut all ties with them. That night, they walked away carrying the same old suitcases they had arrived with years ago. 3 months later, I received news from a friend. Vanessa's engagement had fallen apart after her fiancé's family learned about her $156,000 debt and the drama surrounding our family. She was now working as a retail sales clerk, living in a small apartment and struggling to make ends meet. Meanwhile, my family had finally found peace again. I also learned that my mother had carefully kept records of every expense she had paid for Vanessa over the past 12 years. Those records became the evidence that protected our family when everything came to light. Standing beside my parents during a weekend hike, I finally understood something important. Real family is not made up of people who take advantage of your kindness. Real family is made up of the people who love you, protect you, and stand by your side no matter what.